40 Hours with a Billionaire, the black woman who broke his guarded heart. At 36, Edward Kirk could buy anything. Except the answer to one question: who am I when nobody needs my money? Then he met her. And she put him to work. No special treatment. No shortcuts. Just a peeler, some carrots, and the first honest day's work he'd done in years. Turns out, that's who he was. He just never had the chance to find out. Close your eyes for just a moment. Think about the last time a story made you feel something real. Made your heart race. Made tears fall without permission. Made you remember why being human is so beautifully complicated. That's what we do here at CJ Stories. Whether you're returning or just discovering us, welcome home. This is your safe space for tears, laughter, hope, and everything in between. Today's story will take you somewhere unexpected. It'll make you think. It'll make you feel. And I promise you, you won't see the ending coming. But here's the thing, the magic only works if you stay till the very end. No skipping. Just you, me, and a story that might just change how you see the world. If it moves you, let me know you're here, subscribe, like, and share this with someone whose heart needs touching today. Ready? Let's step into today's story. The coffee went everywhere. 1 second, Deborah Wiley was balancing 3 overstuffed folders, her phone, and a travel mug while pushing through the community center's front door with her hip. The next second, she was colliding with what felt like a very expensive wall-wearing cologne that probably cost more than her car payment. The travel mug hit the ground. Coffee splashed across pristine leather shoes that had definitely never seen the inside of a department store. Oh no. Oh, I'm so sorry. Deborah dropped to her knees, folders scattering, grabbing napkins from her bag that wouldn't do anything against the small lake of French roast now pooling on the community center's tile floor. Her braids fell forward, beads clicking together as she frantically dabbed at shoes that cost more than her monthly grocery budget. It's fine. Really. The voice was deeper than she expected. Calmer too. She looked up, still on her knees, and found herself staring at a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread titled Billionaires Who Don't Smile. Tall. White. Probably mid-30s. Dark hair that was trying very hard to stay perfectly in place despite the chaos she'd just created. Sharp jawline. Eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-blue, like Seattle sky before a storm. Charcoal suit that fit him the way suits fit men in movies about corporate takeovers. He was holding out his hand to help her up. I ruined your shoes, Deborah said, accepting his hand and rising. His grip was firm but not aggressive. Warm. Those are $1,000 shoes, aren't they? Please tell me they're not $1,000 shoes. They're shoes. He released her hand and stepped back, looking down at the coffee damage with an expression that gave away nothing. They'll survive. I'll pay for cleaning. Or replacement. I have a dry cleaner who works miracles, and if he can't fix them, I'll figure something out. Payment plan, maybe. Do people do payment plans for shoes? She was babbling. She knew she was babbling. This man was looking at her like he couldn't quite figure out what species she belonged to. Ms. Wiley. Deborah blinked. You know my name? I'm Edward Kirk. I'm supposed to report here for community service. He pulled a folded paper from his inner jacket pocket, somehow managing not to look ridiculous being formal in a building where the ceiling tiles were water-stained and the walls needed paint. Judge Morrison's office said to ask for you. Oh. Oh no. This was the billionaire. The one she'd been warned about. Kirk Technologies. The man who'd made some poorly timed joke at a charity gala that had gone viral, gotten him dragged on social media for 3 weeks straight, and landed him with court-ordered sensitivity training and 40 hours of community service. The memo had described him as difficult, cold, and probably going to hate every second of helping actual human beings. The memo had not mentioned that he looked like that. Right. Yes. Edward Kirk. Deborah smoothed down her sweater, which was old and comfortable and had a small stain near the hem from yesterday's lunch. She was suddenly very aware that her jeans had a hole in the knee. Not a fashionable hole. An actual worn-through-the-fabric hole. Welcome to Westside Community Outreach Center. I'm Deborah. I run the volunteer coordination and programs here. In Seattle. He said it like he was confirming a fact for a report. Yes. In Seattle. Specifically in the Rainier Valley neighborhood, which is not downtown, in case you were wondering. She bent to gather her scattered folders. He crouched to help, handing her papers without looking at what they said. We serve about 200 families in the area. Job training, after-school programs, food assistance, housing resources. Basically, if someone needs help and we can provide it, we do. And I'm here to learn why I should care about that. It wasn't said meanly. Just factually. Like he was stating the obvious terms of a contract. Deborah stood, folders clutched to her chest. You're here to complete 40 hours of service. What you learn is up to you. Something flickered in his expression. Not quite a smile. Maybe respect for her not sugarcoating things. Fair enough. Let me show you around. Try not to judge us too harshly. Our budget is about 1/10 of what you probably spend on office coffee. This time his mouth definitely moved. Not quite a smile, but close. I'll keep my expectations appropriately low. The community center had been a church once, back in the 1960s. The main room still had vaulted ceilings and tall windows that let in watery March sunlight. Folding tables lined the walls. A group of elderly Korean women were working on a quilting project in one corner. 2 teenagers were studying at another table, textbooks spread between them. The smell of something cooking drifted from the kitchen area, probably Martha's famous vegetable soup that she made every Saturday for anyone who showed up hungry. Edward Kirk took it all in with those unreadable eyes. We run ESL classes on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, Deborah explained, leading him past a bulletin board covered in flyers for everything from tenant rights workshops to diabetes screening. Job skills training on Mondays and Wednesdays. After-school tutoring program 4 days a week. Food pantry is open daily from 10 to 4. We also do emergency assistance, help with utility bills, connecting people to housing resources, that sort of thing. How many staff? Full-time? 3. Me, our director Morris, and our case manager Linda. Everyone else is part-time or volunteer. He stopped walking. 3 people run all of this? We're very efficient. Deborah pushed through the door to the kitchen, where Martha was indeed stirring an enormous pot of soup. Martha, this is Edward Kirk. He's our new volunteer. Edward, this is Martha Washington. Yes, that's her real name. No, we don't make jokes about it anymore because we've heard them all. Martha, 67 and built like someone who'd survived harder things than awkward billionaires, looked Edward up and down with open assessment. You know how to chop vegetables? I've never tried. Then you're about to learn. Wash your hands. Sink's over there. To his credit, Edward Kirk didn't argue. He removed his suit jacket, draped it carefully over a clean chair, rolled up his sleeves to reveal forearms that suggested he did more than sit behind a desk, and washed his hands like he was preparing for surgery. Martha handed him a knife and pointed at a pile of carrots. Small pieces. Uniform size. Don't cut yourself. I don't have time to drive anyone to the emergency room today. Deborah watched him look at the carrots like they were a coding problem that needed solving. Have you really never chopped vegetables? She asked. I have a private chef. He picked up a carrot, examined it, positioned the knife. His first cut was cautious but precise. Had won, anyway. Since the divorce. The divorce that had been all over the news 2 years ago. Tech billionaire and Manhattan socialite split after 5 years of marriage. No kids. Lots of lawyers. Settlement details sealed. You don't cook for yourself now? Deborah leaned against the counter, watching him work through the carrots with methodical focus. I eat out. Or order in. Another carrot reduced to neat, uniform pieces. Cooking for one person seems inefficient. Cooking for yourself is called being an adult. Martha snorted her approval from across the kitchen. Edward glanced up, and there was that almost smile again. I've been told I'm not very good at the practical aspects of adulting. Who told you that? My ex-wife. My assistant. My sister. A judge, most recently. He finished the last carrot and looked at Martha. What's next? Celery. Same size as the carrots. They worked in silence for a few minutes. Edward Kirk chopped vegetables with the same intense focus he probably applied to corporate acquisitions. Martha hummed while she worked. Somewhere in the main room, someone laughed. Why'd you say it? Deborah asked. He didn't look up from the celery. Say what? Whatever you said at that gala. The thing that got you here. His knife stilled. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. There was a segment about childhood food insecurity. Statistics about kids who depend on school lunch programs. One of the other guests made a comment about parents needing to take responsibility. I said something about how easy it is to be responsible when you've never missed a meal in your life. He resumed chopping. Then I laughed. Made it sound like a joke. Like I was dismissing the whole thing. But you weren't. No, I wasn't. He set down the knife and looked at her directly. I was agreeing with the premise that people judge situations they've never experienced. But it came out wrong. Sounded callous. The video clip made it worse. 3,000 retweets later, I was the poster child for out-of-touch billionaires. Deborah studied his face. There was something careful in the way he explained himself. Not defensive. Just precise. Like he'd learned that his words got misinterpreted and he was trying very hard to be clear. Were you? Out of touch? Yes. No hesitation. I grew up with money. Went to private schools. Never worried about where my next meal was coming from or whether my parents could pay rent. I have no personal framework for understanding what the people you serve here deal with every day. He picked up the knife again. That's what the judge decided I needed to learn. And what do you think you need to learn? He looked at her again, those gray blue eyes serious and startlingly direct. I don't know yet. But I'm starting to think it might be important. Something in Deborah's chest did a small, unexpected flip. Martha cleared her throat meaningfully. Soup needs another hour. Edward, you can help Deborah set up the dining area. We'll have about 40 people for lunch. The main room transformation happened every Saturday. Tables rearranged into rows. Chairs set out. Paper plates and plastic utensils because the budget didn't stretch to anything else. Edward followed Deborah's instructions without complaint, carrying chairs like he'd done manual labor before, arranging tables with that same precise focus he'd applied to vegetables. You're in good shape for a guy who sits at a computer all day, Deborah observed. I run, swim, box sometimes. He positioned another chair. Turns out physical exhaustion is an effective way to avoid thinking about things you don't want to think about. There was a story there. Deborah could feel it. Pain underneath the polished surface. What don't you want to think about? He stopped, hands resting on the back of a chair, and looked at her with an expression that was suddenly, startlingly unguarded. How I got to 36 years old without knowing how to be a person instead of a productivity machine. The honesty caught her off guard. This wasn't the cold billionaire the memo had warned her about. This was someone who'd figured out that something in his life had gone very wrong and didn't quite know how to fix it. Being a person is overrated, Deborah said lightly, trying to ease the tension. I've been one for 34 years and I still don't have it figured out. You seem like you have it figured out. I'm very good at faking competence. She grabbed another stack of chairs. My mom taught me that. Look like you know what you're doing and eventually you might actually know what you're doing. Is your mom here? In Seattle? She's in Tacoma. About an hour south. I see her most Sundays. Deborah arranged the last row of chairs. She thinks I work too much and don't date enough. She's not wrong about either of those things. Why had she said that? She didn't share personal information with volunteers she'd just met. Especially not court-ordered volunteers who'd be gone in 40 hours. Edward was looking at her with what might have been curiosity. Why don't you date? Same reason you don't cook. Seems inefficient. She matched his earlier tone deliberately. This time he actually smiled. A real smile that changed his entire face, made him look younger and less like a corporate headshot. Touché. The lunch crowd started arriving at noon. Families with small children. Elderly folks who lived alone and came as much for the company as the food. A couple of guys Deborah recognized from the job training program. Everyone got a bowl of Martha's soup, a roll, and a piece of fruit. Edward watched from the kitchen doorway as Deborah moved through the room, greeting people by name, asking about grandkids and job interviews and whether the housing application had gone through yet. She knew everyone. Remembered details. Made each person feel seen. You ready to serve? Deborah asked, appearing beside him with 2 ladles. I don't know what to say to them. You don't have to say anything profound. Just, would you like soup? Most people will say yes. Some will say thank you. That's the whole conversation. She stationed him at the serving table with Martha. Deborah took the beverage station. For the next hour, Edward Kirk ladled soup into bowls and discovered that most people did, in fact, just say yes and thank you. A few looked at him suspiciously, like they could smell the money on him even in rolled-up shirt sleeves. One elderly woman told him he was too skinny and needed to eat more. A little girl informed him that his eyes were pretty like her cat's. He handled it all with careful politeness, like someone navigating a culture he didn't quite understand but was trying to respect. When the lunch rush ended and the cleanup began, Edward insisted on washing dishes. Deborah found him at the industrial sink, suit jacket still draped over the chair, sleeves rolled up, methodically working through the stack of pots and serving utensils. You don't have to do that, she said. That's not part of the community service requirements. I know. He didn't stop washing. But someone has to do it, and I'm here. Deborah picked up a dish towel and started drying. They worked in companionable silence, the sound of water and clinking dishes filling the space between them. Thank you, Edward said after a while. For today. For not treating me like a punishment case. You are a punishment case. Literally. Court-ordered. I meant for treating me like a person anyway. She glanced at him. Water had splashed on his expensive shirt. His hair had finally given up on perfect and fallen slightly forward. He looked almost normal. Almost like someone who could belong in a place like this. You made it easy, Deborah said honestly. Most court-ordered volunteers complain the whole time. You just showed up and did the work. It's only been 4 hours. True. You might turn into a nightmare tomorrow. He handed her the last clean pot, his fingers brushing hers briefly. The touch was incidental, meaningless, but Deborah felt it anyway. A small electric awareness that she immediately told herself to ignore. What time tomorrow? Edward asked. We're closed Sundays. I'll see you Monday at 9. We're doing intake interviews for the job training program. You can sit in, get a sense of what people are dealing with. I'll be here. He dried his hands, retrieved his jacket, and put it on. The transformation was immediate. Billionaire armor back in place. But something in his eyes was different now. Softer, maybe. Or just less guarded. Edward, Deborah said as he headed for the door. Those shoes really are ruined, aren't they? He looked down at the coffee stains that had dried into the leather. Completely. I really am sorry. Don't be. He met her eyes, and there was that almost smile again. They were uncomfortable anyway. Maybe it's time I learned to wear normal shoes. He left, and Deborah stood in the empty community center, dish towel still in her hands, wondering why her heart was beating just a little bit faster than usual. Morris appeared from his office, 62 years old and built like a retired linebacker, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that missed nothing. That the billionaire? That's him. Seemed decent enough. For a rich guy. Yeah. Deborah folded the dish towel with unnecessary precision. He did. You like him? I just met him, Morris. And you like him? Morris gave her a knowing look. I've known you for 3 years, Deborah. You don't get that look on your face for just anybody. I don't have a look. Sure you don't. He headed back to his office, chuckling. See you Monday. Try not to think about the billionaire all weekend. Deborah absolutely did not think about Edward Kirk that weekend. Except when she was grocery shopping and passed the vegetables and remembered the careful way he'd chopped carrots. And when she had coffee Sunday morning and looked at her plain ceramic mug and thought about his expensive shoes. And when she visited her mom in Tacoma and her mom asked if anything interesting had happened that week and Deborah said no, nothing at all, and her mom looked at her like she was lying. Monday morning arrived with typical Seattle rain. Deborah got to the community center at 8:30 to set up for the intake interviews. 9 o'clock came and went. Edward Kirk didn't show. Disappointment settled in her chest, which was ridiculous. He'd been polite enough for one day, fulfilled 4 hours of his requirement, and probably decided to pay a lawyer to get him out of the rest. Rich people did that kind of thing all the time. At 9:15, the front door opened. Edward Kirk walked in, soaking wet, no umbrella, wearing jeans and a plain sweater that looked expensive but not obviously so. Normal shoes. His hair was plastered to his head from the rain. I'm late, he said. My driver dropped me off at the wrong building. I walked 6 blocks in the wrong direction before I figured it out. Deborah stared at him. You have a driver. Had. I told him not to come back. I'm going to drive myself from now on. Edward looked down at himself, dripping on the floor. I should probably learn to check weather forecasts too. And own an umbrella. Something warm bloomed in Deborah's chest. This man. This ridiculous, earnest, soaking wet billionaire who was trying so hard to figure out how to be normal. There's a towel in the bathroom, she managed. Go dry off before you catch pneumonia. Thank you. He started toward the bathroom, then stopped and turned back. Deborah? I'm glad I'm here. Just so you know. He disappeared before she could respond. Deborah stood alone in the main room, listening to the rain against the windows, and admitted to herself that Morris had been right. She liked him. This was going to be complicated. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next. Now let us continue. 3 weeks later, in early April 2024, Deborah realized that Edward Kirk had quietly become part of the community center's ecosystem. He showed up every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. Always on time now that he'd figured out the route himself. Always in jeans or khakis and simple shirts that probably still cost more than her entire wardrobe but didn't announce it. He'd learned everyone's names. Remembered details about their lives. Asked follow-up questions about job interviews and doctor's appointments and grandchildren's soccer games. Martha had stopped supervising him in the kitchen. He knew where everything was kept, how she liked the vegetables cut, when to start the coffee for the afternoon crowd. The teenagers in the tutoring program had stopped being intimidated by him after he'd admitted he was terrible at chemistry and let 17-year-old Marcus explain molecular bonds to him like he was the student. He'd fixed the constantly running toilet in the men's bathroom by watching a YouTube video and buying parts from the hardware store. Deborah had stopped being surprised by him and started being charmed instead, which was significantly more dangerous. You're staring again, Linda said, appearing beside Deborah's desk with a stack of intake forms. Deborah pulled her attention away from the window that looked into the main room, where Edward was helping Mrs. Chen practice her English pronunciation. I'm not staring. I'm observing our volunteers to ensure quality service delivery. You're staring at the hot billionaire who looks at you like you hung the moon. He does not look at me like that. Deborah. Honey. He looks at you like that constantly. The only person in this building who hasn't noticed is you. Linda set down the forms and gave her a meaningful look. When's the last time you went on an actual date? I went out with that teacher last year. Kevin. That was 18 months ago, and you said he talked about his ex-wife the entire time. He was processing his feelings. He was boring. Linda perched on the edge of the desk. Edward Kirk is not boring. Edward Kirk is successful, smart, surprisingly humble for a billionaire, and he volunteers at a community center in the rain because he wants to, not because he has to anymore. Deborah looked up sharply. What do you mean, not because he has to? He hit 40 hours last week. Morris signed off on his paperwork Friday afternoon. Edwards finished with his court requirement. The information landed in Deborah's chest with unexpected weight. He'd completed his service. He could leave. Go back to his billionaire life and never think about this place again. Except he was here right now. On a Monday morning. Helping Mrs. Chen sound out the word prescription with patient focus. He didn't mention it, Deborah said quietly. Probably because he doesn't plan to stop coming. Linda stood, gathering her forms. The man drove here in a thunderstorm last Wednesday because he promised Marcus he'd help with college application essays. He's not going anywhere unless you want him to. Why would what I want matter? Linda gave her a look that suggested Deborah was being deliberately dense. Ask him to coffee. Or lunch. Or anything that isn't directly related to community service. See what happens. She left before Deborah could argue. Through the window, Edward looked up from Mrs. Chen's workbook and caught Deborah watching. He smiled. That same small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face into something warm and approachable. Deborah's heart did that inconvenient fluttering thing it had started doing whenever he was around. This was a problem. The rain had stopped by lunchtime, leaving Seattle washed clean and unusually bright. Deborah found Edward in the kitchen, assembling sandwiches for the afternoon food service with the same methodical precision he applied to everything. Linda told me you finished your 40 hours, she said, leaning against the doorframe. His hand stilled briefly, then resumed spreading peanut butter. I did. Last week. You didn't say anything. Didn't seem relevant. He finished one sandwich and started another. I'm still showing up. The paperwork doesn't change that. Why are you still showing up? Edward set down the knife and turned to face her fully. His eyes were serious, that gray-blue color that reminded her of Seattle sky. Because I like it here. Because the work matters. Because I'm learning things about myself that I should have learned 20 years ago. He paused. Because you're here. The last part was said quietly, almost carefully, like he wasn't sure he should say it at all but couldn't help himself. Deborah's pulse picked up. Edward. I know this is complicated, he continued. I know I showed up here as a court-ordered volunteer and you're the coordinator and there's probably some ethical line we're not supposed to cross. But I need you to know that I'm not here because a judge told me to be anymore. I'm here because I want to be. And a significant part of why I want to be is you. He wasn't smooth about it. Wasn't trying to charm her or deploy some practiced seduction technique. He was just honest. Straightforward. Stating facts like he'd learned that honesty was the only approach he was any good at. You want to be here because of me, Deborah repeated, testing the words. Yes. Even though I dumped coffee all over your $1,000 shoes and put you to work chopping vegetables on your first day. Especially because of that. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. You treated me like a person who needed to learn something, not a problem that needed managing. You've been doing that every day since. I haven't had many people in my life who do that. Deborah crossed her arms, not defensively, just trying to create some physical boundary between herself and the way his words were making her feel. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying I'd like to take you to dinner. Somewhere that isn't here. As two people who enjoy each other's company, not as volunteer and coordinator. He held her gaze steadily. If you're interested. If I'm reading this completely wrong, tell me now and I'll never mention it again. You're not reading it wrong. The words were out before she could second-guess them. Edward's expression shifted into something that looked like relief mixed with cautious hope. I'm not? No. You're not. Deborah felt her own smile forming despite her best efforts to stay professional. I've been trying very hard not to notice that you're attractive and kind and show up in thunderstorms to help teenagers with college essays. But I've been failing at that for at least 2 weeks now. 2 weeks? He looked genuinely pleased. I've been failing at not noticing you since the day we met. Even covered in coffee? Especially covered in coffee. You apologized by offering a payment plan for shoes. I'd never had anyone offer me a payment plan before. It was charming. Deborah laughed, feeling some of the tension ease from her shoulders. I was mortified. I know. That was also charming. Edward picked up his phone from the counter. So, dinner. Are you free Friday evening? I'm free Friday. I'll pick you up at 7. If you're comfortable sharing your address. Or I can meet you somewhere. Whatever you prefer. The fact that he asked, that he gave her control of the situation, made her like him even more. You can pick me up. I'll text you my address. Okay. He looked at her like he wanted to say something else, but Martha chose that moment to bustle into the kitchen with an empty soup pot. Are you two going to stand around looking at each other or are we going to feed people? She demanded, though her eyes were twinkling. Edward returned to sandwich making. Deborah escaped to her office before anyone could see the ridiculous smile on her face. Friday arrived with the kind of perfect Seattle spring evening that made people forget about the 9 months of rain. Clear sky, temperature in the mid-60s, Mount Rainier visible in the distance like a postcard. Deborah had changed outfits 3 times, called her mom for moral support, and changed again. She finally settled on a deep blue dress that her best friend had made her buy last year for a wedding. It was elegant without being formal, showed her figure without being obvious about it, and made her skin glow. She'd left her braids loose, added small gold earrings her grandmother had given her, and tried not to think too hard about why she cared so much about looking good for Edward Kirk. He arrived exactly at 7, driving himself in a car that was nice but not ostentatious. He dressed carefully too, dark slacks, button-down shirt in pale gray, sport coat. He looked like someone who'd thought about what to wear, which somehow made her feel better about her own 3 outfit changes. "You look beautiful," he said when she opened the door, and the way he said it, simple, direct, genuine, made her believe he meant it. "You clean up well yourself. For a vegetable chopper." "I've been practicing. Martha says my knife skills are almost acceptable now." He opened the car door for her, which should have felt old-fashioned but instead felt considerate. The interior smelled like leather and something clean and masculine that was probably just his soap. "Where are we going?" Deborah asked as he pulled away from her apartment building. "There's a restaurant in Wallingford I've been wanting to try. Small place, locally owned, supposed to have incredible food. But if you'd rather go somewhere else, we can change plans." Wallingford sounds perfect. They drove through the city as evening light turned everything golden. Edward navigated the streets with the focused attention he brought to everything, asking her about her week, telling her about a conversation he'd had with Marcus about engineering programs. "He's incredibly bright," Edward said. "His math scores are high enough for any program in the country. But he doesn't think he can afford to apply to top-tier schools. Most of our kids don't. Application fees alone can be a barrier. What if someone covered those fees? And helped with SAT prep courses, application coaching, that sort of thing?" Deborah looked at him carefully. "Are you offering to do that?" "I'm thinking about it. Would that be helpful or would it be overstepping?" The question was sincere. He really wanted to know if his help would be welcome or intrusive. "It would be helpful," Deborah said. "But you should talk to the kids first. Let them have agency in the decision. Some of them are sensitive about charity. Like someone else I know who offered me a payment plan for shoes?" She laughed. "Fair point. Yes, like me. We're proud around here. It's a survival mechanism. I'm learning that. I'm also learning that pride and accepting help aren't mutually exclusive. That's a good lesson. Took me until I was 30 to figure it out." He glanced at her as they stopped at a red light. "What happened when you were 30? Deborah hesitated, then decided honesty deserved honesty. "My mom had a stroke. She survived, recovered almost completely, but the medical bills were crushing. I had to accept help from family, from friends, from programs I'd spent years helping other people access. It was humbling. And necessary. And it taught me that community works both ways." "Is she okay now? Your mom?" "She's great. Tough as nails. Still thinks I work too much and don't date enough." "What's she going to think about this? Us having dinner?" "She's going to be thrilled. She's been on me for months to meet someone nice." Deborah smiled. "She'll probably want to meet you immediately. I apologize in advance. I'd like to meet her. If we get to that point." The casualness of the statement, the assumption that there might be a future point where meeting parents made sense, sent a pleasant warmth through Deborah's chest. The restaurant was small and intimate, tucked into a converted house with exposed brick and soft lighting. They were seated at a corner table with a view of the street. The menu was seasonal, local, creative without being pretentious. Edward ordered wine after checking what she liked. They both chose the chef's tasting menu, deciding to trust the kitchen. "I haven't done this in a long time," Edward admitted after the server left. "Eaten at a restaurant? Dated. Been on an actual first date where I cared about making a good impression." Deborah sipped her water, studying him across the table. "When was the last time?" "Before my marriage. So, 9 years ago. My ex-wife and I met through family connections. It was very practical. Compatible backgrounds, similar goals, good partnership on paper." He turned his wine glass slowly. "Turns out that's not enough to build a life on." "What happened?" "We were business partners who shared a house. Good colleagues. Terrible spouses. She wanted someone more social, more interested in the circuit of galas and benefits and society events. I wanted someone who could tolerate that I'd rather work than make small talk with strangers." He met Deborah's eyes. "We were both trying to fit into shapes we weren't designed for. When we finally admitted it wasn't working, the relief was mutual. That must have been hard anyway." "It was. Not because I was heartbroken. Because I felt like I'd failed at something I should have been able to figure out. I'm good at systems, at solving problems. But I couldn't solve us. The first course arrived, spring vegetables prepared in ways that made them look like art. They ate in comfortable silence for a moment. My longest relationship was 4 years, Deborah offered. I was 26 when we met. He was great on paper too. Teacher, involved in the community, wanted the same things I wanted. Or so I thought. What happened? He wanted me to be smaller. Not physically. Emotionally. Professionally. I'd just gotten the job at the community center and I was passionate about it, working long hours, bringing work home. He said I cared more about strangers than about him. Asked me to choose. She shrugged. I chose the work. He said that proved his point. Left and married someone else within a year. Edward set down his fork. He asked you to choose between him and work that matters to you? Yes. He was an idiot. The bluntness of it surprised a laugh out of her. That's what my mom said. Less politely. Your mom sounds wise. Edward leaned forward slightly. For the record, watching you work is one of my favorite things. The way you remember everyone's name, the way you know exactly what each person needs, how you make a chaotic room feel manageable just by being in it. It's remarkable. Anyone who asked you to be smaller than that didn't deserve you. Deborah felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wasn't used to being seen this clearly. You're good at this. At what? Saying exactly the right thing. I'm really not. I'm terrible at it most of the time. But with you, the right things are easy to say because they're true. The evening continued like that. Easy conversation flowing between courses. Discoveries about each other that felt significant and small at the same time. He told her about his sister who lived in Portland and worked in environmental law. She told him about her childhood in Tacoma, her dad who'd passed away when she was 22, her mom who still called her every Sunday morning without fail. They talked about books and music and the particular kind of gray that Seattle rain produced. He admitted he'd never been to the Pacific Science Center despite living in Seattle for 8 years. She confessed she'd never been to the opera despite loving music. We should fix both of those things, Edward said over dessert. Are you asking me on a second date before the first one is over? I'm asking you on multiple future dates before the first one is over. If that's presumptuous, I apologize. It's not presumptuous. It's honest. I like honest. He smiled at her, and Deborah felt something shift in her chest. Something opening up that she'd kept carefully locked for a long time. They lingered over coffee, neither wanting the evening to end. When they finally left the restaurant, the spring night had turned cool. Edward offered his jacket without her asking. It smelled like him, clean and warm and becoming familiar. The drive back to her apartment was quieter, comfortable silence replacing conversation. Edward walked her to her door like she knew he would. Stood close enough that she could feel his warmth but didn't crowd her space. Thank you for tonight, he said. For taking a chance on having dinner with a guy who didn't know how to chop vegetables. Thank you for being the kind of guy who learned to chop vegetables and kept showing up even after you didn't have to. He reached for her hand, tentative, giving her space to pull away. She didn't. His fingers threaded through hers, warm and steady. I'd like to kiss you, Edward said quietly. But only if you want that too. Deborah's heart was racing. I want that too. He stepped closer, his free hand coming up to her face, thumb brushing her cheek with gentle precision. Then he leaned in and kissed her. It was soft. Careful. A question and an answer at the same time. His lips were warm, his touch respectful, everything about the kiss suggesting he was paying attention to her response. Deborah kissed him back, her free hand finding the front of his shirt, pulling him slightly closer. He made a small sound in the back of his throat, deepening the kiss just enough to make her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, Edward rested his forehead against hers, breathing a little unsteady. That was worth waiting for, he murmured. Worth 3 weeks of vegetable chopping? Worth any amount of vegetable chopping. She laughed softly. He kissed her again, briefer this time, like he was already reluctant to leave. I'll see you Monday, he asked. You're still coming to the center? Of course. Why wouldn't I? Because you finished your service and you got the girl. You might not need community service anymore. Edward pulled back enough to look at her seriously. I'm not there for community service anymore. I'm there because that work matters. Those people matter. And yes, you matter too, but those things aren't connected. I want to keep volunteering because I found something there that was missing from my life. Something real. The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight. Okay. I'll see you Monday. And Saturday. And maybe Wednesday for lunch if you're free. That's a lot of seeing each other. Too much? No. It's good. It's really good. He kissed her one more time, gentle and sweet, then made himself step back. Good night, Deborah. Good night, Edward. She watched him walk to his car, watched him turn and wave before getting in, watched him drive away. Then she went inside and called her mom before she could talk herself out of it. Ma? You awake? Baby, it's 9:30 on a Friday. Of course I'm awake. How was your date? How did you know I had a date? Her mother laughed. Because you've been talking about this man for 3 weeks without realizing you were talking about him. Now tell me everything. Deborah curled up on her couch, still wearing Edward's jacket, and told her mom everything. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next. Now let us continue. By mid-May 2024, Edward Kirk had become a fixture in Deborah's life in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. They fell into a rhythm. He volunteered at the community center 3 times a week, same as before, but now their coffee breaks lasted longer. Their conversations deepened. The way he looked at her across crowded rooms made her stomach flip. They had dinner every Friday. Went to the Pike Place Market on a sunny Saturday morning and ate fresh donuts while watching the fish throwers perform for tourists. Drove to Snoqualmie Falls on a Sunday afternoon and hiked the trail together, Edward's hand warm and steady in hers. Spent an entire evening at her apartment watching old movies, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. He met her mom on a Sunday in early May. Deborah had been nervous, but Edward had shown up with flowers and an honest admission that he was terrible at meeting parents but wanted to make a good effort. Her mom had loved him immediately, especially after he'd spent an hour helping her reorganize her kitchen cabinets and listening to stories about Deborah's childhood with genuine interest. "You keep that one," her mom had whispered when Edward was out of earshot. "He's good people." Deborah was 34 years old and falling in love for the first time in a way that felt real and solid and possible. She told herself not to overthink it, to just enjoy what they were building. Then Victoria showed up. It was a Wednesday afternoon in mid-May. Deborah was in her office reviewing grant applications when Linda appeared in the doorway with an expression that suggested trouble. "There's a woman here asking for Edward. Says she's his ex-wife." Deborah's stomach dropped. His ex-wife is here? At the community center? Tall, white, looks like she walked out of a fashion magazine. Designer everything. Currently examining our furniture like she's afraid she'll catch something. Victoria Kirk, now Victoria Ashford, Deborah remembered from the news articles, was standing in the main room looking exactly like Linda had described. Impeccable blonde hair. Cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Deborah made in a month. The kind of polished, careful beauty that came from a lifetime of professional maintenance. She was also beautiful in a way that made Deborah suddenly, uncomfortably aware of her own off-the-rack cardigan and the fact that she'd spilled coffee on her shirt that morning. "Can I help you?" Deborah asked, approaching with her professional smile firmly in place. Victoria turned, assessed Deborah in one sweeping glance, and offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm looking for Edward Kirk. I was told he volunteers here." "He does. He's not here today. Can I give him a message?" "You must be Deborah, the community center coordinator." Victoria's tone was pleasant, but something underneath it felt sharp. "Edward's mentioned you." "He has?" "Oh yes. He's been quite enthusiastic about his volunteer work. Very unlike him, actually. Edward doesn't usually care much about charitable causes. Too practical." Victoria looked around the room with that same assessing gaze. "Though I suppose he found his own reasons to keep coming back." The implication was clear. Deborah kept her expression neutral. "Edward's been a valuable volunteer. The community appreciates his time." "I'm sure they do. And I'm sure you do as well." Victoria's smile sharpened slightly. "I actually came to discuss a business matter with him. We still have some shared investments that require attention. But since he's apparently been spending all his time here instead of returning my calls, I thought I'd track him down in person. I can let him know you stopped by." "That's kind of you. You know, it's interesting. In the 5 years Edward and I were married, he never once volunteered anywhere. Never saw the point. Said his time was better spent making money that other people could distribute more efficiently." Victoria tilted her head, studying Deborah. "But I suppose people change. Or they pretend to for a while, anyway. Until the novelty wears off." Something cold settled in Deborah's chest. "I'm sorry, what are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm simply observing that Edward has a pattern. He gets interested in something new, commits completely, restructures his entire life around it. Then he realizes it doesn't fit into the life he actually has, and he moves on." Victoria's voice was conversational, almost kind. "I should know. I was one of those interests once. Edward and I aren't. This situation isn't the same. Isn't it? He's told you about us, I'm sure. How compatible we were on paper. How it didn't work out because we wanted different things." Victoria stepped closer, lowering her voice. "What he probably didn't tell you is that I wanted him. The real him, not the version he performs when he's trying to be someone he thinks he should be. And eventually, he couldn't maintain the performance anymore. He went back to being who he actually is, someone who works 80 hours a week and doesn't have room in his life for anything that doesn't fit into a spreadsheet. You don't know anything about what Edward and I have." "You're right. I don't. But I know Edward. And I know that right now, you represent something he thinks he wants. A simpler life. More meaning. Connection to real people doing real work. Victoria's smile turned almost sympathetic. But in a few months, when the shine wears off and he realizes that your world and his world don't actually overlap, he'll go back to his life. And you'll be the interesting detour he took once. The community service project that taught him some valuable lessons. Deborah's hands were shaking. She crossed her arms to hide it. I think you should leave. I'm not trying to be cruel. Honestly. I'm trying to save you some heartbreak. Victoria pulled a business card from her purse and set it on the nearest table. When it falls apart, and it will, call me. We can commiserate over wine. I know what it's like to believe Edward Kirk can be something he's not. She left, heels clicking on the tile floor, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and a sick feeling in Deborah's stomach. Deborah stood alone in the empty main room, Victoria's words echoing in her head. She wanted to dismiss them. Wanted to believe they came from bitterness and jealousy and nothing true. But a small, scared part of her wondered if Victoria was right. Edward called that evening like he always did. Deborah almost didn't answer. How was your day? He asked, voice warm and familiar. Fine. Normal. Your ex-wife stopped by. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, Victoria came to the center? She said you weren't returning her calls about shared investments. Decided to track you down in person. I've been meaning to deal with that. I'm sorry she showed up at your workplace. That was inappropriate. She had some interesting things to say about you. About us. Another pause. What did she say? Deborah stood at her apartment window, looking out at the Seattle evening. That you have a pattern. You get interested in something new, restructure your life around it, then realize it doesn't fit and move on. She said I'm your current interest. That when the novelty wears off, you'll go back to your real life and I'll be the meaningful volunteer experience you had once. You don't actually believe that. I don't know what I believe, Edward. We've known each other for 2 months. You showed up at the center because a judge ordered you to. Now we're dating and you're helping with grant applications and talking about funding college scholarships. It's a lot. It's fast. It's real. His voice was firm now, insistent. What we have is real. Is it? Or am I the person who makes you feel good about yourself? The way to prove you're not the out-of-touch billionaire from the viral video? That's not fair. Maybe not. But Victoria's right about one thing, your world and my world are very different. You live in a universe of private drivers and $1,000 shoes. I work at a community center where we celebrate when we can afford new printer paper. At some point, that gap is going to matter. It doesn't have to, doesn't it? Deborah pressed her forehead against the cool glass. What happens when you get bored of playing normal? When you realize that my life is always going to be budget meetings and serving soup and dealing with broken toilets? When you want to go back to galas and board meetings and whatever billionaires do with their time? I don't want that life. That's what I've been trying to tell you. That's why the divorce happened. I don't fit in Victoria's world any more than she fit in mine. But you don't fit in my world either, Edward. Not really. You're visiting. You're a tourist in normal life. Eventually you'll want to go home. This is home. The intensity in his voice made her chest ache. What we're building is home. I know it's fast and I know it's different from anything either of us planned, but it's real. I love you, Deborah. The words should have made her happy. Instead, they terrified her. You love me or you love the idea of me. The community coordinator who makes you feel like you're doing something meaningful. I love you. The person. The woman who offered me a payment plan for shoes and makes everyone around her feel seen and calls her mom every Sunday and gets passionate about grant funding. I love how you know everyone's story. How you make terrible coffee and don't apologize for it. How you scrunch up your nose when you're thinking. I love all of it. I love you. Deborah felt tears building behind her eyes. I can't do this right now. Deborah. I need some time. To think. To figure out if Victoria's right or if I'm just scared. She wiped at her eyes with her free hand. I'll see you at the center on Saturday. We can talk then. I don't want to wait until Saturday. I need space, Edward. Please. He was quiet for a long moment. Okay. If that's what you need. But I'm not giving up on us. I hope you know that. I know. I'll call you soon. She hung up before he could respond. Then she sat on her couch and cried, hating Victoria for planting doubts and hating herself for letting them take root. Her mom called an hour later. Deborah ignored it. She called back. Deborah finally answered on the third attempt. What happened? Her mom demanded. How do you know something happened? Because you ignored my calls and you never ignore my calls. Talk to me, baby. Deborah told her everything. Victoria's visit, the things she'd said, the conversation with Edward, the fear that maybe this whole relationship was built on sand. Her mom listened without interrupting. When Deborah finally ran out of words, she sighed. You done? Her mom asked. Yeah, I'm done. Good. Now let me tell you something. That ex-wife of his? She's scared. Scared of what? That Edward found something real with you. Something she couldn't give him. So she's trying to poison it before it proves that the problem in their marriage was both of them, not just him. Her mom's voice was gentle but firm. Baby, I've seen you in relationships. I saw you with James, how you made yourself smaller to fit what he wanted. This thing with Edward? You're not smaller. You're more yourself. He doesn't ask you to be anything but who you are. But what if she's right? What if this is just temporary for him? What if it's not? What if you're throwing away something real because you're scared it might not last? Her mom paused. Everything ends eventually, Deborah. Your dad and I had 28 years before he passed. Were those years less meaningful because they ended? Should I not have loved him because I knew I might lose him someday? That's different. It's not different. It's life. You can protect yourself from heartbreak by never risking your heart, or you can love someone and trust that it's worth the risk. But you don't get both. Deborah pulled a throw pillow against her chest. I'm scared, Ma. I know you are. But that man loves you. I saw it when he was here, the way he looks at you like you're the most important person in the world. That's not fake. That's not novelty. That's real. How do you know? Because I've been alive 60 years and I know what real looks like. Also because he reorganized my entire spice cabinet alphabetically and by cuisine type without being asked. Nobody does that unless they're trying to impress the mother of a woman they really love. Despite everything, Deborah laughed. He did do a very thorough job on those spices. He did. Now stop letting that bitter ex-wife get in your head and talk to your man. Actually talk to him, not from a place of fear, but from a place of wanting to understand. What if I'm not ready? Then take your time. But don't take so much time that you lose something good because you were too afraid to believe in it. They talked for another hour. When Deborah finally hung up, she felt steadier. Not fixed, but less broken. Saturday arrived gray and drizzling, typical Seattle spring weather. Deborah got to the center early, anxious and uncertain. Edward was already there, sitting in the parking lot in his car, clearly waiting for her. He got out when she pulled in. Looked tired, like he hadn't slept much. But his face brightened when he saw her. Hi, he said simply. They stood in the parking lot, rain misting around them, neither quite sure what to say. Can we talk? Edward asked. Really talk, not over the phone? Yeah, we should talk. They went inside to her office. Deborah closed the door, turned to face him, and found him watching her with an expression that was careful and hopeful and guarded all at once. I'm sorry Victoria showed up here, he said. I should have dealt with the investment paperwork sooner. I've been avoiding it because talking to her means revisiting the marriage, and I don't want to revisit it. I want to move forward. With you. Edward, I need to understand something. Why are you here? Really? Is this about me, or is this about proving something to yourself? He took a breath, clearly choosing his words carefully. When I first came here, it was court-ordered. I didn't want to be here. I thought it would be a waste of time, something to endure until I could get back to my real life. He stepped closer. Then I met you. And I met Martha and Morris and Mrs. Chen and Marcus and all these people who were just living their lives and helping each other and finding meaning in things I'd never paid attention to. And I realized my real life was empty. Productive, successful, profitable. But empty. That doesn't answer my question. I'm getting there. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. You asked if you're the person who makes me feel good about myself. And yes, you do. Being with you makes me feel like a better version of myself. But that's not why I love you. I love you because you're brilliant and compassionate and you make me laugh. Because you're not impressed by my money and you argue with me when you think I'm wrong. Because you see me as a person, not as a balance sheet or a business opportunity or a disappointing ex-husband. Deborah felt her defenses cracking. I'm scared this won't last. That the differences between our lives will become too much. I'm scared of that too. I'm terrified I'll mess this up the way I've messed up every other relationship. That I'll work too much or say the wrong thing or fail to be what you need. Edward's voice dropped. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you. That's what Victoria never understood. She wanted safety, compatibility, a partnership that made sense on paper. I want something real, even if it's scary and uncertain. What if we can't bridge the gap between your world and mine? Then we build a new world. One that fits both of us. He reached for her hand tentatively. I'm not asking you to fit into my life. I'm asking if we can build a life together. One where I volunteer at the community center because I care about the work, and you let me help fund scholarships because I have resources that can make a difference. Where we figure out how to combine what we both bring to the table instead of pretending one of us has to change completely. Deborah looked down at their joined hands. His thumb was tracing small circles on her palm, a gesture that had become familiar over the past 2 months. I love you too, she said quietly. I've been trying not to because it felt too fast and too risky. But I do. I love you. Edward's expression transformed into pure relief. You do? Yeah. I really do. Even though you make terrible coffee and you alphabetize things that don't need alphabetizing and you still don't own an umbrella despite living in Seattle. I bought an umbrella last week. I keep forgetting to use it. Of course you do. She stepped closer, letting herself lean into him. His arms came around her immediately, holding her like she was something precious. I'm sorry I let Victoria get in my head. She knows how to find weak spots. It's one of her talents. Edward pressed a kiss to the top of her head. But she's wrong about us. This isn't temporary. This isn't me playing at being normal. This is me finding out who I actually am when I'm not trying to be what everyone expects. And who are you? I'm still figuring that out. But I know I'm someone who loves you. Someone who wants to build a life that matters, not just a career that impresses people. Someone who's learning that chopping vegetables and fixing toilets and helping kids with college essays is just as important as closing business deals. Deborah pulled back enough to look up at him. We're really doing this? Trying to make this work despite all the complications. We're really doing this. If you want to, I want to. I'm still scared, but I want to. Being scared is okay. We'll figure it out together. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Deborah kissed him back, feeling the last of her doubts dissolve into certainty. They would figure it out. Together. The office door burst open. Morris stood there with his phone in hand, face pale. Deborah. We have a problem. The city just called. They're cutting our funding. Effective immediately. We have 30 days before we have to close the center. The world tilted. Deborah pulled away from Edward, staring at Morris in disbelief. What? They can't do that. We're in the middle of the fiscal year. Budget shortfall. They're cutting funding to all non-essential services. We're on the list. Morris looked devastated. I'm sorry. I don't know how we're going to save this. Deborah felt Edward's hand on her back, steady and supportive. But her mind was racing, calculating, trying to figure out how to save the center that had become her life's work. 30 days. They had 30 days to find a solution, or everything she'd built would disappear. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next. Now let us continue. The last week of May 2024 felt like watching something precious slip through her fingers in slow motion. Deborah spent every waking hour on the phone. Grant organizations, city council members, private donors, anyone who might have funding or influence or ideas. She wrote proposals, submitted emergency requests, called in every favor she'd accumulated in 3 years of running the center. Nothing worked. The grant organizations had already allocated their annual budgets. The city council was sympathetic but firm. The budget cuts were across the board, non-negotiable. Private donors were willing to help but couldn't cover the $200,000 annually the city had been providing. Morris was already looking for other jobs. Linda was updating her resume. Martha had started quietly packing up the kitchen supplies she'd brought from home over the years. The center would close in 3 weeks. 21 days before the after-school program ended, the food pantry shut down, the job training stopped. 21 days before 200 families lost their support system. Deborah felt like she was failing everyone who depended on her. Edward had been careful. Supportive but not pushy. He showed up at the center like always, helped where he was needed, held her when she cried from exhaustion and frustration. He'd offered to help financially within an hour of hearing the news. She'd said no immediately. Deborah, I have resources that could solve this problem, he'd said gently. Let me help. I can't take your money. It wouldn't be right. Why not? I donate to plenty of organizations. This one matters to me. You matter to me. That's exactly why I can't accept. It would change everything between us. I'd always wonder if we were together because you funded my work. If I was staying because I needed your money. I won't do that to us. He hadn't pushed. Hadn't tried to convince her or go behind her back. He'd respected her boundary even though she could see it frustrated him. But as the days passed and options ran out, Deborah started to wonder if her pride was going to cost 200 families their lifeline. It was a Thursday evening in early June when everything came to a head. Deborah was alone in her office, staring at spreadsheets that didn't add up no matter how many times she recalculated. Her phone showed 11 missed calls from her mom. She'd stopped answering because she couldn't handle hearing the concern in her voice. The office door opened. Edward stood there with takeout containers and a thermos. You haven't eaten today, he said, setting the food on her desk. Martha told me. Also that you snapped at Mrs. Chen this morning, which means you're running on empty. Deborah looked at the food. Smelled like Thai from the place near her apartment that she loved. Her stomach growled traitorously. I shouldn't have snapped at Mrs. Chen. She forgives you. She also made me promise to make sure you eat something. Edward poured soup from the thermos into a cup and handed it to her. Drink. Then we're going to talk. I don't want to talk. I want to find a solution. There is a solution. You're just too stubborn to accept it. Deborah set down the cup harder than necessary. Don't start. I have to start. Because in 3 weeks, this place closes and all these people lose something that matters. And you're going to let that happen because you're afraid of what it means if you accept help from me. It's not about being afraid. It's about maintaining boundaries. It's about pride. Edward's voice was firm but not angry. I understand pride. I respect it. But right now, your pride is making decisions that hurt people who need this center. You think I don't know that? Deborah stood, exhaustion and frustration boiling over. You think I'm not aware that my refusal to take your money is going to impact families who depend on us? I think about it constantly. But I also think about what happens if I let you fund the center. How that changes the power dynamic between us. How I'd never know if you're with me because you want to be or because you've invested financially in my work. You'd know because I've been showing up here since before funding was ever an issue. Because I love you regardless of whether this center exists or not. But it does exist. And it's my responsibility. Not yours. Edward ran his hand through his hair, clearly trying to find the right words. What if we structure it differently? Not a donation from me personally, but through my company's charitable foundation. A proper grant with applications and oversight and all the official processes. Would that be more acceptable? It's still your money. It's Kirk Technologies' money. Distributed through proper channels. You'd have to apply, meet requirements, report on outcomes just like any other grant. The foundation board would review it, not just me. Deborah wanted to say yes. Wanted to grab the lifeline he was offering and save the center. But something in her couldn't let go of the fear that accepting would fundamentally change what they had. I need to think about it, she said finally. Edward's expression showed disappointment but also understanding. Okay. Think about it. But Deborah? Think about what matters most here. Your pride, or the 200 families who need this place. He left, and Deborah sank back into her chair, staring at the cooling soup. Her phone rang. Her mom, again. This time Deborah answered. Baby, you've been avoiding me for 4 days, her mom said without preamble. Talk to me. Deborah told her everything. The funding crisis, Edward's offer, her refusal, the impossible choice between pride and practicality. Her mom listened quietly. Then she said, You remember when I had my stroke? Of course I remember. You remember how you had to accept help? From family, from programs, from people who cared about you. Yes. And you remember how hard that was for you. How much you hated feeling dependent on other people's generosity. I remember. Deborah's throat tightened. But you did it anyway. You accepted help because the alternative was worse. Because my health mattered more than your pride. Her mom's voice was gentle. This is the same thing, baby. Those families matter more than your fear about what accepting Edward's help might mean. But what if it changes everything between us? What if it doesn't? What if this is just Edward being who he is, someone with resources who wants to use them for good? You're not taking advantage of him. He's offering freely. The only question is whether you trust him enough to accept. After they hung up, Deborah sat in the quiet office for a long time. She thought about Marcus, who was counting on college application help. About Mrs. Chen, who was finally starting to feel confident in her English. About the single mothers who depended on the food pantry. About the elderly folks who came for the company as much as the services. She thought about Edward, who'd shown up in the rain to help teenagers with essays. Who'd learned to chop vegetables and fix toilets. Who'd completed his court-ordered hours and kept coming back because the work mattered to him. Who loved her. She pulled out her phone and called him. He answered on the first ring. I'm sorry, she said. For being stubborn. For letting my fear make decisions that hurt people who need help. You don't need to apologize. Ido. You were right. My pride was getting in the way of what matters. She took a breath. Tell me about the foundation grant process. The official one, with applications and oversight. She heard relief in his voice. The foundation meets quarterly. Next meeting is in 2 weeks. I can get your application prioritized for review. No prioritización. I want it reviewed the same way any other application would be. Properly. Deborah, the center closes in 3 weeks. We don't have time for the normal process. Then I'll find bridge funding somewhere else to keep us open until the foundation makes a decision. But I need to know that if they approve it, it's because the application was strong enough on its own merits. Not because you pushed it through. Edward was quiet for a moment. You're asking me to let the center potentially close while we wait for a committee decision I could expedite. I'm asking you to let this happen the right way. Can you do that? What if they say no? Then we'll figure out something else. But at least I'll know I didn't compromise what we have by taking shortcuts. He sighed. You're going to give me gray hair before I'm 40. You're 36. You have 3 years. At this rate, I'll be gray by next month. But there was warmth in his voice. Okay. We do it your way. Proper application, normal review process. But I'm helping you find bridge funding to keep the center open until the decision comes through. How? I know people. Not me personally funding it, but people who might be willing to provide short-term support. Let me make some calls. Edward. This part isn't about us. It's about me using my network to connect you with resources. That's allowed, right? Even by your very strict rules? Deborah felt herself smile for the first time in days. That's allowed. Good. I'll start making calls tomorrow. You work on the foundation application. Deal? Deal. And Edward? Thank you. For understanding why this matters to me. For not just bulldozing over my concerns. I'm learning that loving you means respecting your boundaries even when they're inconvenient. His voice softened. I'll see you tomorrow? You'll see me tomorrow. The next 2 weeks were intense. Deborah wrote the strongest grant application of her life, documenting every program, every outcome, every family served. She included data, testimonials, budget projections, sustainability plans. It was thorough and professional and made a compelling case for why the center deserved funding. Edward, true to his word, made calls. Within 3 days, he'd connected Deborah with a local philanthropist who agreed to provide 3 months of bridge funding. Not from Edward's money, from someone who'd been looking for exactly this kind of project to support. The center stayed open. The programs continued. Families kept getting served while they waited for the foundation's decision. Morris stopped looking for other jobs. Linda unpacked her desk supplies. Martha kept making soup. Edward kept showing up, kept helping, kept being present without being overbearing. He walked the impossible line between supportive partner and respectful volunteer, somehow managing both. The foundation meeting was scheduled for June 20th. Deborah wasn't allowed to attend, applicants never were. She spent the day at the center, trying to work, mostly just refreshing her email every 30 seconds. Edward was in the meeting. He'd recused himself from the vote due to personal conflict of interest, but he was there to answer questions about the application if needed. At 4:30, her phone rang. Edward's name on the screen. Her hands shook as she answered. Hello? The board voted unanimously to approve funding for 3 years. Edward's voice was warm with suppressed joy. Full operational budget plus expansion funds for new programs. They want to partner with you long-term. Deborah sat down hard in her desk chair. They approved it? They loved the application. Said it was one of the strongest they'd seen. Several board members want to visit the center, potentially get involved personally beyond just financial support. He paused. You did this, Deborah. Not me. Your application, your work, your vision. I just made sure it got in front of the right people. She was crying. Happy tears, relief tears, exhausted tears all mixed together. We're saved. The center is saved. You saved it. I'm just glad I could help. Morris appeared in her doorway, clearly reading her expression. She nodded at him, still crying. He whooped loud enough that she heard Martha and Linda react in the main room. I need to go tell everyone, Deborah managed. Can I call you back? Go celebrate. I'll see you tonight. I'm bringing champagne. The center erupted in celebration. Staff, volunteers, clients who happened to be there, everyone hugging and crying and laughing. Someone called the local news. A reporter showed up within an hour, wanting to cover the story of the community center saved by anonymous philanthropic support. Deborah did the interview in a daze, talking about community resilience and the power of people coming together. She didn't mention Edward by name, respecting the foundation's preference for quiet philanthropy. But when she looked up during the interview, she saw him standing in the back of the room. He'd arrived early, couldn't wait until evening. Their eyes met across the crowded space, and he smiled at her with such pure pride and love that her heart felt too big for her chest. After the reporter left and the celebration wound down, Deborah found Edward in the kitchen helping Martha clean up. You're here early, she said. Couldn't stay away. I wanted to see you. He dried the last dish and set it aside. How are you feeling? Relieved. Grateful. Exhausted. Happy. She moved closer to him. Scared that I almost lost this because I was too proud to accept help. But you didn't lose it. You found a way to accept help on your terms. That takes courage too. I love you, Deborah said. For understanding that I needed to do this my way. For helping without taking over. For being patient when I was being stubborn. Edward pulled her into his arms, holding her close. I love you too. And I'm proud of you. What you built here, what you fought for, it's remarkable. They stood together in the quiet kitchen, the chaos of the day settling into peaceful contentment. Take me home, Deborah murmured against his chest. I want to celebrate with just you. No crowds, no reporters. Just us. Best offer I've had all day. They went back to her apartment. Edward had indeed brought champagne, good champagne, not the grocery store kind. They toasted to the center's survival, to 3 years of secured funding, to the future. Then they sat on her couch, Deborah curled against Edward's side, finally allowing herself to relax. I was thinking, Edward said, his fingers running absently through her braids. The foundation board wants to do site visits, maybe get more involved. That means people are going to figure out that we're together. Is that okay with you? Deborah considered. A month ago, the question would have worried her. Now it just felt like the next natural step. It's okay. We're not hiding anything. You volunteer there legitimately. The foundation approved the grant on merit. We don't have anything to be ashamed of. No, we don't. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Though I should probably warn you, once my sister finds out I'm in a serious relationship, she's going to want to meet you immediately. She's protective. Your sister who does environmental law in Portland? That's the one. Sarah. She's brilliant and intense, and she'll probably interrogate you to make sure your intentions toward her baby brother are honorable. You're the baby? By 3 years. She's never let me forget it. Edward smiled. Fair warning, she's going to love you. She's been telling me for years that I needed to find someone who wouldn't put up with my workaholic tendencies. When do I meet this paragon of sisterly wisdom? She's coming to Seattle next month for a conference. I thought maybe we could have dinner. You, me, Sarah, and if you're comfortable with it, your mom too. Let the families meet. The casualness of the suggestion, the assumption that their families meeting made sense, that they were building toward something permanent, made Deborah's heart skip. You want our families to meet. Eventually they should, right? If we're doing this for real. Edward shifted so he could look at her directly. We are doing this for real, aren't we? Building toward something permanent? Is this your way of asking if I see a future with you? This is my way of telling you that I see a future with you and hoping you see the same thing. Deborah reached up, touching his face gently. I see it. A real future. The kind where families meet and we figure out how to combine our lives and we build something that matters. Good. He leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet. Because I'm in this completely. For the long term. Just so we're clear. We're clear. They stayed up late, talking about the future. About what the center could do with 3 years of stable funding. About introducing their families. About the possibility of Edward moving closer to her neighborhood instead of living downtown. About building a life together that honored both of their worlds. When Deborah finally fell asleep, it was with Edward's arms around her and certainty in her heart that they were going to make this work. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next. Now let us continue. July 2024 arrived with the kind of perfect Seattle summer that made people forget the rest of the year was rain. Clear skies, warm temperatures, Mount Rainier visible almost every day like a promise on the horizon. The community center was thriving. With 3 years of secured funding, Deborah had been able to hire 2 additional staff members and expand the after-school program. The foundation board had visited twice, and 3 members had become regular volunteers. The local news feature had brought in additional donations and volunteer applications. More importantly, it had brought visibility to the work they were doing. Other organizations were reaching out for collaboration. The city council had apologized for the funding cuts and was looking for ways to restore support in the next budget cycle. Everything Deborah had worked for was coming together. Her relationship with Edward had settled into something that felt both exciting and comfortable. He'd moved to an apartment in Beacon Hill, 15 minutes from her place instead of downtown. He still ran Kirk Technologies, but he'd restructured his schedule to include consistent volunteer time at the center and actual evenings off. They had dinner with her mom every other Sunday. He'd met her extended family at a 4th of July barbecue and had spent 2 hours playing basketball with her teenage cousins, emerging sweaty and happy and more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. She'd met Sarah in late June. Edward's sister had indeed been protective and intense, asking pointed questions about Deborah's intentions before declaring her approved and pulling her aside to thank her for making Edward human again. They'd bonded over stories of Edward's tendency to solve emotional problems like engineering challenges, and Sarah had extracted a promise that Deborah would call if Edward ever got too deep in his own head. Life was good. Really good. Better than Deborah had imagined possible 4 months ago when she dumped coffee on an expensive stranger's shoes. Which was why the text from Edward on a Saturday morning in mid-July seemed odd. Can you meet me at the center at 2 p.m.? I have something to show you. She responded, I'll be there anyway. Saturday meal service, remember? I know. But can you come to the main room at 2? Trust me. Deborah arrived at the center at noon like usual. Edward was already there, but he seemed distracted. He helped with lunch service, but she caught him checking his phone several times. When she asked if everything was okay, he just smiled and said it was fine. At 1:30, Morris appeared at her elbow. I need you to take a break. Let me handle the cleanup. I can help clean. It's not a big deal. Deborah. Take a break. Go to your office for 30 minutes. I've got this. There was something knowing in his expression. Martha was smiling too widely. Linda was trying very hard to look busy while clearly watching their conversation. "What's going on?" Deborah asked suspiciously. "Nothing. Everything. Go to your office. Edward will come get you at 2. Deborah went to her office, deeply confused. She tried to work on grant reports but couldn't focus. At exactly 2 o'clock, Edward knocked on her door. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready for what?" "Come with me. You'll see." He took her hand and led her toward the main room. The doors were closed, which was unusual. She could hear voices inside, lots of them. "Edward, what did you do?" "Just trust me." He opened the doors. The main room was full of people. Her mom, front and center, beaming. Sarah, Edward's sister, standing beside her. Morris, Martha, and Linda. Mrs. Chen and her family. Marcus and the other teenagers from the tutoring program. At least 50 people from the community center, all dressed nicely, all watching the doorway with expectant smiles. The room had been decorated. Flowers everywhere, simple, beautiful arrangements in colors Deborah loved. Soft music playing. Lights strung along the ceiling that she'd never seen before, creating a warm glow. "Edward, what is this?" Deborah's heart was pounding. He led her to the center of the room, everyone making space, forming a circle around them. His hand was warm in hers, steady despite the fact that she could feel a slight tremor in his fingers. "4 months ago," Edward began, his voice clear enough for everyone to hear, "I walked into this building because a judge told me I had to. I was angry about it. Resentful. Convinced it would be a waste of my time." A few people chuckled. Deborah's eyes were already filling with tears. "Then I met a woman who dumped coffee all over my shoes and offered me a payment plan to replace them." Edward smiled at her, that soft smile that was just for her. And everything changed. He took both her hands now, facing her fully. "You taught me what matters. Not money or success or how many deals I can close. People matter. Community matters. Showing up matters. You taught me how to be present instead of productive. How to see people instead of problems. How to build something real instead of just something profitable." Deborah's mom was crying. Sarah was recording on her phone. Martha was dabbing at her eyes with a dish towel. "You taught me what love should look like," Edward continued. "Patient and honest and challenging me to be better. You never asked me to be anything but myself. You saw past the money and the mistakes and the terrible coffee I make." "Your coffee is terrible," Deborah managed through tears. "It really is," he agreed. "But you drink it anyway because you love me despite my flaws. Just like I love you. Your stubbornness and your pride and your refusal to take the easy way if it compromises your principles. I love all of it. I love you." He released one of her hands and reached into his pocket. When his hand emerged, he was holding a small velvet box. Deborah's breath caught. Edward got down on one knee. The room went completely silent except for a few sniffles from the crowd. "Deborah Wiley," Edward said, opening the box to reveal a ring that was beautiful and perfect, elegant but not ostentatious, a single stone in a setting that was classic and timeless. "I know we've only known each other 4 months. I know that's fast. But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life learning from you, loving you, building something meaningful together. Will you marry me?" Deborah looked down at him. At this man who'd learned to chop vegetables and fix toilets and show up in thunderstorms. Who'd respected her boundaries even when they were inconvenient. Who'd helped save the center without taking credit. Who'd become part of this community not because he had to, but because he wanted to belong to something real. Who loved her. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I'll marry you." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Edward stood, sliding the ring onto her finger with hands that were definitely shaking now. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her while everyone they cared about celebrated around them. When they finally broke apart, her mom was there immediately, pulling Deborah into a fierce hug. "I told you he was good people," her mom whispered. "You were right, Ma." Sarah hugged her next, then Morris, then Martha, then what felt like everyone in the room. Marcus gave Edward an elaborate handshake that turned into a hug. Mrs. Chen blessed them in Mandarin and English both. Someone had brought cake. Someone else had brought champagne. The celebration transformed into an impromptu engagement party, complete with toasts and laughter and the kind of joy that only comes from community genuinely happy for two of their own. Later, when things had calmed down and people were starting to leave, Deborah found Edward in the kitchen helping Martha pack up leftover cake. "You planned all of this," she said. "I had help. Your mom, Sarah, Morris. Basically everyone you know conspired to make this happen." He finished wrapping a piece of cake and turned to her. "Was it too much? I know you're private. If you'd rather have had something smaller." She kissed him, stopping the worried words. "It was perfect. Proposing here, with everyone we care about. It was exactly right. I wanted them to be part of it. They're part of our story. Part of what brought us together and what we're building." Deborah looked around the kitchen that had become so familiar. The community center where she'd built her life's work, where Edward had learned to be more than just successful, where they'd found each other. "I love you," she said, "for understanding that this place matters. That these people matter. They're our family. Of course they matter." Edward pulled her close. "Speaking of family, your mom asked when we're thinking about the wedding. I told her that was entirely up to you, but she has opinions about seasons and venues." "Of course she does. What did she say?" "She thinks spring would be nice. Maybe April or May next year. She also suggested we might want to have it here, at the center, since this is where we met." Deborah looked up at him, surprised. "You'd want to get married here? You could afford any venue in the city." "I don't want any venue in the city. I want to get married in the place where I learned what love actually means. Where we built something real together. If you want that too." She did want that. She wanted to exchange vows in the room where he'd first learned to chop vegetables, surrounded by the community that had become their foundation. "Spring wedding at the center," Deborah said. "I love that idea." "Good. Because I may have already told your mom yes, and she's already planning." Deborah laughed. "Of course she is." They stayed at the center until evening, celebrating with the volunteers and families who'd become their community. As the sun set and the last guests trickled out, Deborah and Edward sat together in the main room, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "How did I get here?" Deborah murmured. 4 months ago, I was single, stressed, convinced I didn't have time for a relationship. Now I'm engaged to a man I met because he spilled my coffee. You dumped coffee on me. Let's keep the facts straight. Same difference." She looked at the ring on her finger, catching the light. "This is real, right? We're really doing this. We're really doing this. You're stuck with me now." "Good. I choose stuck with you." 3 weeks later, Deborah and Edward had dinner with both families, her mom, her aunt and uncle, Edward's sister Sarah, and his mother who'd flown in from Boston specifically to meet the woman who'd captured her son's heart. Edward's mother, Patricia, was elegant and reserved in a way that initially intimidated Deborah. But over appetizers, she'd taken Deborah's hand and said quietly, "Thank you for loving my son. For seeing who he really is underneath all the armor he built. I haven't seen him this happy since he was a child." The two mothers bonded immediately over their shared goal of planning the perfect wedding. By dessert, they'd scheduled 3 separate planning sessions and were debating flower arrangements. "We've lost them," Edward observed to Deborah. "They're going to plan the entire wedding without consulting us." "Probably. Are you okay with that? As long as I get to marry you at the end of it, they can plan whatever they want." August brought the first foundation board meeting since the engagement. Edward had officially stepped down from the board to avoid any conflict of interest regarding the center's funding. The board had responded by inviting Deborah to join as a community representative, giving the center a permanent voice in funding decisions. She'd accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to advocate not just for her center but for other community organizations across Seattle. September arrived with cooler weather and the start of the school year. The center's after-school program had a waiting list for the first time ever. Marcus had gotten into MIT with a full scholarship package that Edward's foundation had helped arrange. Mrs. Chen had passed her citizenship test and insisted on celebrating with everyone at the center. Life felt full in the best possible way. On a Saturday evening in late September, Edward and Deborah were at her apartment cooking dinner together. He'd been taking lessons and was now moderately competent in the kitchen, though she still supervised carefully. "I've been thinking about something," Edward said, carefully stirring the pasta sauce he'd made from scratch. "Should I be worried?" "No. Maybe. I don't know." He turned down the heat and faced her. "What would you think about me joining the center staff officially? Not as a volunteer, but as a full-time employee." Deborah set down the salad tongs. "You want to leave Kirk Technologies?" "Not entirely. I'd stay on as chairman, handle major strategic decisions. But I want to step down as CEO. Promote my COO. She's brilliant, ready for the role, and honestly better at the day-to-day operations than I ever was." He leaned against the counter. "I want to work at the center. Maybe develop the job training program, help with fundraising and community partnerships. Use my business background for something that directly helps people." "Edward, you don't have to do this. You can volunteer and run your company. You don't have to give up your career." "I'm not giving it up. I'm changing it. Focusing on what matters to me." He moved closer to her. "The last few months working at the center, even just as a volunteer, have been more fulfilling than the last 10 years at Kirk Technologies. I want to do this. But only if you're comfortable with it. I know it would change the dynamic, us working together officially." Deborah considered. Working with Edward every day, building programs together, using his skills and resources to help even more people. "We'd need clear professional boundaries," she said. "At work, you'd be my colleague, not my fiancé." "Agreed. Morris would technically be your supervisor. You'd have to take direction from him." "I can handle that. Morris is good at what he does." And you'd have to actually apply for the position. Interview properly. No special treatment just because you're engaged to the program coordinator. Edward smiled. I wouldn't want it any other way. So you're okay with this? I'm more than okay with it. I think you'd be incredible. But are you sure? This would mean a massive pay cut. A completely different lifestyle. I don't need the money. I have more than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. What I need is purpose. Meaning. The chance to build something that matters alongside the person I love. He took her hands. I'm sure. Then yes. Apply for the position. Interview with Morris. If he thinks you're qualified, I'd love to work with you every day. Even though my coffee is still terrible, we'll keep you away from the coffee maker. He kissed her, and the pasta sauce began to bubble over on the stove. They broke apart laughing, Edward rushing to rescue dinner while Deborah watched with her heart full. This was her life now. Cooking dinner with a man who'd learned to be present. Building a future that combined both their worlds. Creating something meaningful together. She'd never been happier. The wedding took place on an April Saturday in 2025, exactly 1 year and 1 month after they'd first met. The community center had been transformed. Flowers everywhere, white chairs set up in rows, soft music playing. The same room where Edward had learned to chop vegetables and Deborah had coordinated programs now held their closest family and friends, all gathered to celebrate. Deborah wore a dress her mom had helped her choose, elegant and simple, with lace sleeves and a flowing skirt. Her braids were styled up, small flowers woven through them. She felt beautiful and loved and ready. Her mom walked her down the aisle, both of them crying happy tears. Edward stood at the front in a perfectly tailored suit, but his eyes were only on her. When she reached him and took his hands, he whispered, "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. You clean up pretty well yourself. For a vegetable chopper." The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They'd written their own vows. Edward went first. "Deborah, you taught me that success isn't measured in profit margins but in lives touched. That showing up matters more than grand gestures. That love means respecting boundaries even when they're inconvenient. I promise to keep learning from you, to keep showing up, to keep building a life that matters. I promise to love you completely, even when you're stubborn, especially when you're stubborn. I promise to be your partner in everything, for the rest of my life." Deborah's voice shook as she spoke her vows. "Edward, you came into my life covered in coffee, and somehow that was exactly right. You showed me that accepting help doesn't make me weak, it makes me human. That love doesn't require perfection, just presence. I promise to let you help, to build our life together, to never stop challenging you to be your best self. I promise to love you completely, terrible coffee and all, for the rest of my life." They exchanged rings. The officiant pronounced them married. Edward kissed her while everyone cheered. The reception was held in the same room, tables set up with food Martha had supervised despite being a guest. There were toasts and laughter and dancing. Marcus gave a speech about how Edward had helped him believe in his own potential. Deborah's mom welcomed Edward officially into the family with words that made everyone cry. Late in the evening, Deborah and Edward snuck away to the kitchen for a quiet moment alone. "We got married in a community center," Deborah said, looking around the familiar space. "Best venue choice we could have made." Edward pulled her close. "This is where our story started. Where it continues. Where we'll keep building something that matters. You don't regret it? Giving up the billionaire lifestyle for this?" "I didn't give up anything. I gained everything that matters. Purpose, community, you." He kissed her forehead. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.